I'd like to welcome everybody to a meeting of the Boston Region Metropolitan Planning Organization. All participants will join the meeting with muted microphones. Please rename yourself to include your first name, last name, and affiliation if you have one. Please do not unmute or mute yourself. To participate in the discussion, please select the raise hand function. Find this by clicking on the participants button at the bottom of the screen, and a window will pop up with a raise hand button at the bottom. The presenters will then call on participants and unmute their microphones. If you're on the phone, you can use *9 to raise your hand. If you have any technical difficulties, please contact Rosine Foley via the chat box at rfoley@ctps.org or call her at 857-702-3704. This meeting is accessible to people with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant with exceptions with the following standards: Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1 Level AA standards and revised Section 508 standards. If you require any additional accommodations in order to participate fully in this meeting, please contact Rosine Foley of the MPO staff at rfoley@ctps.org or call her at 857-702-3704. As I said, I'm David Muller from Secretary Pollock here, and Rosine, please call the roll. I said Secretary Pollock, I meant Secretary Tesler. Rosine, call the roll.
MassDOT Chair.
I'm here.
MassDOT C2.
Not seeing John Bouchard.
MassDOT Highway Division.
John Romano here.
Mbta.
Jillian Linnell on behalf of General Manager PopTax here.
Massachusetts Port Authority. Metropolitan Area Planning Council.
Good morning. This is Eric Barassa with MAPC.
MBTA Advisory Board.
Morning, Brian Kane, MBTA Advisory Board, representing 176 cities and towns in the MBTA Service District.
Regional Transportation Advisory Council.
Leonard Diggins Advisory Council here.
City of Boston, Boston Transportation Department.
Bill Conroy, representing the City of Boston, Mail Walsh.
City of Boston BPDA.
Hey, it's Jim Fitzgerald with BPDA, representing Mayor Janey with the City of Boston.
Thank you. At-large city, City of Everett.
Jay Monty, representing Mayor DeMaria and the City of Everett.
At-large city, City of Newton.
David Kozis, representing Mayor Ruth Ann Fuller in the City of Newton.
At-large town, Town of Arlington.
Daniel Amstutz, Town of Arlington, representing Select Board Chair Steve DeCourcy and MPO area towns.
At-large town, Town of Brookline.
Heather Hamilton for the Town of Brookline.
Inner Core Committee, City of Somerville. I don't see Tom Bent.
You're trying to unmute.
Oh, there we go.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Tom Bent, City of Somerville, representing Mayor Joe Curtatone in the Inner Core.
Thank you. Minuteman Advisory Group on Interlocal Coordination, Town of Acton. Metro West Regional Collaborative, City of Framingham.
Thatcher Keyser, Framingham, representing Mayor Spicer, Metro West.
North Shore Task Force, City of Beverly.
Darlene Nguyen, representing Mayor Cahill on behalf of the North Shore Task Force.
North Suburban Planning Council, City of Woburn.
Yes, good morning. Tina Cassidy, representing Woburn Mayor Scott Galvin and the North Suburban Planning Council.
South Shore Coalition, Town of Rockland. Southwest Advisory Planning Committee, Town of Medway. And the Three Rivers Interlocal Council, Town of Norwood, Neponset River Regional Chamber.
Good morning, Tom O'Rourke from the town of Norwood, representing the Trick subregion.
Thank you. That calls the roll.
Thank you, Rosie. Next item on the agenda is the chair's report. I don't have one today. Next item is Executive Director's report. Tegan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome, everyone, and for our first meeting in June. And first, I wanted to remind you all that I think several weeks back, I sent an invitation to the board members from Nancy Harmden to celebrate Carl Quackenbush's life on June 26th in Warwick, excuse me. So I wanted to remind you because the RSVP, if you would like to attend, is due on June 5th, so in 2 days. So feel free to reach out to me if you'd like a reminder or to see that again. And otherwise, perhaps I'll see some of you there to remember Carl and his long contribution to CTPS and the MPO. Next, I'd like to give a few updates about CTPS. We have a couple of staffing updates. First, we have recruited internally into our new data strategist position, and Stephen Andrews will be filling that role. And he'll be responsible in that role for the strategic direction of CTPS's data management, as well as how we build our external relationships needed to make that strategy successful. So we, in addition to that internal recruitment, we've also hired a new transportation planner that will be supporting both MPO work as well as our work for the Mbta and other transit providers. And her name is Hain Kim. So if you see either of them or hear about them, then please congratulate them and welcome Hain. So in terms of outreach updates, we have a few events coming up. Also some things that did just occur. So first of all, staff presented at the Mass DOT CIP Boston region meeting on June 1st. And they talked a bit about the TIP and how that relates to the CIP. We also have an upcoming Intercore Committee Transportation meeting that will be on June 23rd. And this will be a special meeting where we talk about the bus network redesign. And then the Intercore Committee Transportation group will gather again on July 14th for a summer meeting to discuss the MBTA's Fare Transformation Project, as well as other ongoing MPO activities. And then finally, thank you to those of you who have joined the Pilot Transit Working Group Coffee Chats. We hosted chats on topics like medical and human services transportation, connecting gaps in transit service, post-COVID transit recovery, as well as microtransit. And so we look forward to presenting those chats, the outcomes of those chats at the next Pilot Transit Working Group meeting. So keep an eye out for that. For today, we have 4 substantive items on the agenda. First, we have the new federal fiscal year 2022 to 26 TIP, which you would be voting to endorse today. We also have a vote to endorse the federal fiscal year 21 to 25 TIP amendment number 6. And then we have 2 presentations. One will be on the federal fiscal year 2020 sub-regional priority roadway study, which was done on Route 53 in Norwell. Finally, I also will be presenting on the draft CTPS strategic plan, which was posted, a draft of which was posted to the agenda, and also the timeline for our implementation of that plan. So the next board meeting is currently scheduled for June 17th. We're still in development on the agenda of that meeting, and we'll keep you posted. But there will also be an A&F committee meeting prior to that MPO meeting at 9 o'clock. And I think it is also worth reminding folks that after the meeting today, there will be a meeting of the TIP project costs ad hoc committee, the group that's agreed to get together and discuss how they want to recommend that the board approach cost and schedule changes in the TIP going forward. With that, Mr. Chair, I am finished. If there are any questions.
Thank you, Tegan. Any questions for Tegan? Seeing and hearing none. Next item on the agenda is public comments. Is there anyone from the public who would like to comment at this time? If so, please raise your hand. Johan Epke.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and good morning to the members of the board. My name is Johannes Epke. I'm a staff attorney at Conservation Law Foundation in Boston, an environmental nonprofit with a long history of transportation advocacy in Massachusetts. My comments today are focused on the 2022-26 TIP up for vote today, and primarily focused on the equity performance report component of the TIP. CLF is very supportive of inclusion of the equity analysis in transportation planning, but the analysis has to be tied to some performance standards. And let me talk through what that means. The per capita emissions reductions and per capita transportation investments should be required to prioritize transportation equity populations, those underinvested and overburdened people and communities. As noted in section 617, and I'll quote a section here, in this year's TIP, the minority population, people with low incomes, people with low English proficiency, and people ages 17 or under would continue to experience less of an absolute decrease in emissions than their non-TE counterparts. While the data shows a decrease in emissions exposure over the previous year's TIP, there is still an opportunity for improvement so that TE populations receive a comparable decrease relative to their non-TE counterparts. What this means is, there's an overall emissions reduction, and we applaud that, but the plan prioritizes emissions reductions for the wealthy and white communities that already have the cleanest air, thus making that already shameful discrepancy and difference in air quality between transportation equity and non-transportation equity communities even worse. Sort of similarly, in investment, the table shows, table 6.6 shows that while people of color represent 28% of the population, they only receive 21% of the funding. This body holds all the purse strings and has all of the tools to model and understand the impacts of investments, and yet endorses plans year after year that continue to widen these gaps. As the quote reveals, there's an aspiration to make the reductions comparable, but what is really needed is that that the TIP prioritize the people and communities that need it most. I therefore implore you to reject this TIP and demand that MPO dollars start to make the transportation system more equitable, or at least not continue to make things relatively worse. There are a number of projects that could be included in the TIP to do so, such as prioritizing electrification of buses on routes that serve these transportation equity populations, or fully funding the red-blue connector and others. I'm happy to answer questions or go into more detail, and appreciate the opportunity to comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other comments at this time? Seeing none, if you want to comment during the meeting, please raise your hand and we will call on you.
I'm sorry, did we actually have a comment from Wig Zamor, I believe?
Oh, yes, we do. Sorry, I didn't see it. We came up late. Go ahead, Wig.
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, and introduce yourself for the record, even though we all know you.
Yeah, sure. I'm Wig Zamor, citizen of Somerville. Used to attend a lot of MPO meetings. I miss them, as I'm sure you do this year. I just wanted to comment on the I-93 corridor improvement project in Somerville, number 606528. It's basically structural repair. And I wanted to ask that you consider joining that project with the pedestrian and bicycle improvements needed in the corridor, and point out that the health effects from exposures to the emissions in this corridor result in about 1,000 times as many deaths as the pedestrian and bicycle deaths. So I would say over a 10-year period, maybe maybe 3,000 to 6,000 deaths due to cardiovascular lung cancer and other chronic diseases caused by particulate matter exposure. I would just point out, as I did at a quite good meeting earlier this week on this project specifically, that there are whole city studies from Scandinavia, cities that are comparable to our own in North America, that have shown in Stockholm a very large increase in lung cancer mortality, all other things being equal after subtracting smoking, socioeconomic, et cetera. Basically, 60% higher lung cancer mortality to people who live closest to the mobile pollution of the big roadways in Stockholm. Similar studies in California of childhood asthma showing similar or greater increases in childhood asthma among the children in California who live near freeways, a 90% increase in those studies, which are considered authoritative by EPA and the National Institutes of Health. And lastly, the largest fraction of mortality from exposure to highway pollution is cardiovascular by far, 40% of all deaths in our population. And Mike Brower's group in Vancouver, similarly to the Stockholm study, looked at every adult in the city in this study and found a 55% higher mortality to cardiovascular disease after subtracting covariates and confounders for those living within 50 meters. These are very large health effects. And I just think that, especially given that this highway was built after the Clean Air Act of 1970 in contravention to it, that it would be helpful and really meaningful to the population affected to address the highway noise and air pollution issues with sound walls, to address the pedestrian and bike fatalities of recent years with improvements to ped and bike facilities, and to address the health in general along with the highway improvement. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Whit. Other comments at this time? Seeing and hearing none, if you have a comment during the meeting, please raise your hand and we will call on you. Next item on the agenda is committee chairs reports. Are there any? Hearing none. Regional Transportation Advisory Council report. Lynn, are you here?
I am here, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much. Bringing on the video. And so thank you very much. And so we did have a meeting and Sandy Johnson and Ariel Patterson came to talk to us about innovations in estimating trip generation. It's a very fruitful conversation. And we also reviewed Chapter 7 of the needs assessment, and that generated a really good conversation. The next meeting is going to feature Matthew Raifman. And I know I've been plugging this for a while. You know, I'm really excited about him. He was one of the researchers in a paper entitled, Mortality Implications of Increased Active Mobility for a Proposed Regional Transportation Emissions Cap and Invest Program. And even though I'm promoting this a lot, I do that not so much to beg you all to attend, but to let you know that this is happening. It's going to be recorded, and I think a lot is going to come out of it. I know people are busy, so if you can't make it, of course, no offense to me, but I think it's just going to be a fruitful conversation. And lastly, I want to congratulate Stephen Andrews on his new position. He's a really good guy. I'm happy to see him take on this new position. And to Hayne, I'm sorry, I don't have the last name. I think it may be a rite of passage that you may have to attend some Rider Oversight Committee meetings. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Lynn. Any questions for Lynn? Seeing none. Next item on the agenda is approval of the Mpo minutes from March 25th. Can I get a motion and a second? Please state your name for the record. Brian Kane.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Eric Barassa.
I second that motion.
Motion having been made and seconded. Any questions, comments, changes, or suggestions? Seeing none, please call the roll.
MassDOT Chair,
Yes.
MassDOT Seat 2,
John Bouchard, yes.
MassDOT Highway Division,
John Romano, yes.
MBTA,
Jillian Linnell, yes.
MAPC,
Eric Barassa, yes.
MBTA Advisory Board,
Brian Kane, yes.
Regional Transportation Advisory Council,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
City of Boston, Boston Transportation Department.
Bill Conroy, yes.
City of Boston, BPDA.
Jim Fitzgerald, yes.
At-large city, City of Everett.
Jay Monty, yes.
At-large city, City of Newton.
David Kozis, yes.
At-large town, Town of Arlington.
That's yes.
At-large town, Town of Brookline.
We're just having some audio issues with Heather right now, so maybe we can come back.
Okay. Inner Core Committee, City of Somerville.
Yes.
Metro West, City of Framingham. Okay, we can come back to Thatcher.
Thatcher Keyser votes yes.
Okay,
Sorry.
thank you.
Button-
North Shore
Darlene Nguyen
City.
votes yes.
Oh, okay, thank you. North Suburban Planning Council, City of Woburn.
Tina Cassidy votes yes.
Swap, Town of Medway.
Peter Pelletier votes yes.
And Trick, Norwood, and RRC.
Trick votes yes.
And is Heather able to unmute?
Yeah, sorry about that. I got booted out. Heather Hamilton for Brookline, yes.
Thank you. That motion carries.
Thank you, Rosie. Now I need a motion and a second to approve the meeting minutes of April 8th, and please state your name for the record. Eric Barassa.
I make a motion to approve the minutes.
Tina Cassidy.
And Tina Cassidy seconds that motion.
Thank you. Motion having been made and seconded, please call the roll.
MassDOT Chair,
Yes.
MassDOT Seat 2,
John Bouchard, yes.
MassDOT Highway Division,
John Romano, yes.
MBTA,
Jillian Linnell, yes.
MAPC,
Eric Barassa, yes.
MBTA Advisory Board,
This time, let's go with I.
Regional Transportation Advisory Council,
I will follow Ms. Clay's lead and say aye too.
City of Boston, Boston Transportation Department,
Bill Conroy, yes.
City of Boston BPDA,
And with the I.
At-large city, City of Everett,
Jay Monty, yes.
At-large city, City of Newton,
David Kozis, yes.
At-large town, Town of Arlington,
Daniel Amstutz, yes.
At-large town, Town of Brookline,
Heather Hamilton, aye.
Inner Core Committee, City of Somerville,
Tom Bent, aye.
Metro West, City of Framingham,
Thatcher Keyser votes aye.
in North Shore, City of Beverly,
Darlene Nguyen votes yes.
North Suburban, City of Woburn,
Tina Cassidy votes yes.
Swap, Town of Medway,
Pete Pelletier, yes.
and Trick, Norwood, and RRC.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Thank you. That motion carries.
Thank you, Rosie. Next item on the agenda is Amendment 6 to the 2021 to 2025 TIP. Matt Genova.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everyone.
Today, I'm here today to discuss Amendment 6 to the federal fiscal years 2021 through 25 Transportation Improvement Program. Ooh, there we go. For a quick refresher, Amendment 6 involves changes to both the highway and transit sections of the TIP, the full details of which are available in a handout posted to the MPO meeting calendar for your review. Beginning with the highway changes, which are outlined on the slide before you, 2 state prioritized bridge replacement projects have seen cost increases in federal fiscal year 2021, both of which are proposed to be addressed using remaining funds from other projects that have been closed out in fiscal 2021. These projects are number 608079 on Masquannacut Street in Sharon and project number 608637 on Florida Road in Maynard. Amendment 6 also updates the project description for project number 606528 on Interstate 93 in Somerville. This project has been reclassified as a bridge preservation project as opposed to its original designation as a bridge reconstruction project. On the transit side of things, Amendment 6 programs state matching funds in federal fiscal year 2021 alongside expiring 2018 federal funds for a facility renovation project for the Cape Ann Transportation Authority. This project proposes to spend roughly $65,000 to replace 10,000 square feet of carpeting at CADA's administration and operations facility. Amendment 6 also includes changes across the MBTA's federal capital program. Much like was discussed for the MPO funded projects in Amendment 5 that we discussed last month, Amendment 6 aligns the MBTA's current fiscal years 2021 through 25 funding with the agency's proposed fiscal years 2022 through 26 program. The table you see on the screen here, which is also available in the online handout, shows the adjustments made to each of the MBTA's programs across fiscal years. Federal fiscal year 2021 was adjusted to match the projects the MBTA expects to advance this year using federal funds, which is largely determined by project readiness. From there, fiscal years 2022 through 25 have been adjusted based on expected funding availability and anticipated allocations. These numbers may continue to be adjusted as part of the annual CIP process, for which the public comment period is currently ongoing. Many of the specifics on individual projects and programs were discussed in late April by Jillian Linnell in her presentation on the MBTA's proposed fiscal years 2022 through 26 TIP programming. The changes in Amendment 6 allow the MBTA to continue to move forward with that proposed plan while addressing any cost or schedule changes for projects programmed in fiscal 21. Amendment 6 was released for a 21-day public review period on May 10th. This review period concluded earlier this week on May 31st. During this time, no public comments were submitted on the amendment. That's all I have on Amendment 6, so I'll turn it back over now to the chair for questions and a vote.
Thank you, Matt. Any questions for Matt? Seeing none. Matt, is this a Brian Kane has a question? I'm sorry, Brian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just real quick, what's the difference between a bridge reconstruction versus a bridge replacement versus a bridge rehabilitation? Thank you.
John Bouchard, do you want to answer that one?
Yes. The difference is bridge preservation, and there's no, it's a, almost like a maintenance preservation of the existing, surface, no necessarily overall improvements. Reconstruction generally is, when we're making improvements, expanding the cross section, increasing the life. Preservation is more like a maintenance standardization type of effort, Brian.
Thank you.
So Matt, is this a vote to endorse or release? I wasn't following.
Yeah, this is a vote to endorse.
That's what I thought. Thank you, Matt. Can I have a motion and a second to endorse the TIP amendment as presented today? Eric Barrasso.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion to endorse TIP Amendment 6.
Thank you. Leonard Diggins.
I will second it.
Motion having been made and seconded, please call the roll.
MassDOT Chair,
Yes.
MassDOT Seat 2,
John Bouchard, yes.
MassDOT Highway Division,
John Romano, yes.
MBTA,
Jillian Linnell, yes.
MAPC,
Eric Barassa, yes.
MBTA Advisory Board,
Brian Kane, yes.
Regional Transportation Advisory Council,
Leonard Jenkins, yes.
City of Boston, BTD,
Conroy, yes.
City of Boston, BPDA,
Tim Fitzgerald, yes.
At-large City of Everett,
Jay Monty, yes.
At-large City of Newton,
David Kozis, yes.
At-large Town of Arlington,
Neil Amstutz, yes.
At-large Town of Brookline,
Heather Hamilton, aye.
Inner Core City of Somerville,
Tom Bent, yes.
Metro West City of Framingham,
Patrick Keyser votes yes.
North Shore City of Beverly,
Darlene Wynn votes yes.
North Suburban City of Woburn,
Tina Cassidy votes yes.
Swap Town of Medway,
Town of Medway votes yes.
and Trick Town of Norwood and RRC.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Thank you. That motion carries.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is the approval of the FY 22 to 26 TIP or that.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Chair. For my second presentation today, I will tee up a vote by this board on the endorsement of the federal fiscal years 2022 through 26 Transportation Improvement Program. In doing that, I want to cover just a handful of items. First, I'll touch on our goal for today's conversation, and then we'll provide a brief summary of the contents of the draft tip. From there, I'll go over the public comments that we received during the public review period. I'll end with just a few notes on where we go in the tip process from here before opening things up for a discussion and a vote. This is pretty straightforward, but it never hurts to emphasize that our main goal for today is for this board to vote on the endorsement of the fiscal years 22 through 26 tip. This is the final action required of this body before the new tip can take effect on October 1st of this year. Before we get to a vote, I want to take a minute to summarize all that's contained in the draft tip. As always, there is a draft of the final report posted to the MPO meeting calendar under today's date for those who would like to have it available for reference during the conversation. The fiscal years 2022 through 26 tip includes $4.75 billion in investments in highway and transit projects throughout the Boston region. It details all of the investments proposed using the MPO's regional target funds, as well as the investments proposed by MassDOT, the Mbta, CADA, and MWRTA using federal funding. Those regional target funds that the MPO has direct discretion over represent roughly 11% of all federal and state matching funds in the Boston region. As I noted earlier in the discussion of the TIP amendment, the fiscal years 2022 through 26 TIP also reflects the programming in fiscal years 2022 through 2025 of both TIP amendments 5 and 6, which have already been endorsed by this board. I know there are a lot of moving pieces this time of year, so to clarify, the recently passed amendments 5 and 6 both cover fiscal years 2021 through 2025. The newly drafted TIP that's before us for consideration now covers federal fiscal years 2022 through 26. And so that means that the overlapping fiscal years 2022 through 2025 are identical between each of the amendments and the new TIP, pending a vote today. Because we're in the time of year when all the statewide capital planning processes come together, it never hurts to take a minute to discuss the relationships between those efforts. The TIP that's up for a vote today includes all federally funded transportation projects in the Boston region. The STIP, or the State Transportation Improvement Program, is a compilation of all of the regional TIPs from the 13 MPOs and TPOs in Massachusetts. And then the state's capital investment plan, or CIP, is the broadest capital plan, which includes all the transportation projects funded across Massachusetts using both federal and state funds. As I mentioned earlier, the CIP is currently available for public review. So if you didn't have the chance to make your voice heard as a part of the TIP process, you still have time to do so through the CIP process. All of the projects that are in the Boston Region MPO's TIP also appear in the draft CIP. The version of the TIP that's been posted for today's meeting has been slightly updated since this board voted the draft out for public review on April 29th. MPO staff received some feedback on the draft TIP from our partners at MassDOT and the Federal Highway Administration. In response to that feedback, draft versions of the self-certification pages for the MPO planning process and the Global Warming Solutions Act were added to the front of the report. Further changes were made throughout the document to clarify language, fix broken links, and correct formatting. We also added some public comments into Appendix C that didn't make it into the draft report, and updated the geographic distribution of funding in Appendix D to show both the regional distribution of funds over the 5 years of this TIP, as well as that same distribution over a longer time period from federal fiscal year 2011 to 2026, 15-year period. In the coming days, a final endorsed version of the TIP will be posted that will include the signed endorsement pages and any changes to the draft based on public comments. Posted for today's meeting, there's also a summary of all the public comments received over the last few weeks, along with responses to them. This summary will be added to Appendix C of the final report. Speaking of public comments, on May 10th, the draft TIP was released for a 21-day public review period. The comment period officially closed on May 31st at 5 p.m., and all comments received during this time have been posted to the MPO meeting calendar under today's date for your review. So that's the full text of all comments is available there. And again, there is also a table posted to the meeting calendar that summarizes the public comments and includes a response to them. And these comments are organized by topic for ease of navigation. During the public comment period, MPO staff hosted 2 virtual TIP open houses. At these sessions, we discussed the contents of the draft TIP and addressed any comments or questions that arose. In total, we had roughly 35 people attend these sessions, and we got some positive feedback that these events help make the TIP more accessible for folks who are less familiar with the process. With all of that table setting, let's go ahead and dive into the public comments. I know this says 598, but we actually had 2 late arriving comments yesterday, which puts us at a nice even 600 public comments on the draft TIP during this public comment period. This is on top of the more than 500 comments we received during the development of this year's TIP over the last several months. Comments were submitted on several specific projects, as you see here. I'll start with 2 projects that are not yet funded in the draft TIP. Beginning with the Belmont Community Path, we had 2 comments submitted in support of this project, one from the Belmont School Committee and the other from the Friends of the Belmont Community Path. These letters highlight the robust support for the project in the community, tout the benefits of the project for supporting safe, sustainable access for students to the nearby Belmont middle and high schools, and highlight the efforts that will be made to continue to advance the project in the coming years. The letters request that this project, which was considered for MPO funds this year, be funded in a future TIP cycle. We received 1 letter of support and 1 petition of concern on the reconstruction of Route 30 in Westin. The support letter was submitted by Garrett Woolman, Framingham resident who uses Route 30 to commute by bicycle. Mr. Woolman notes his disappointment that this project was not selected for funding this year, highlighting the current safety deficiencies along Route 30. The petition was signed by 29 residents of Westin. The signers expressed their concerns about the proposed Route 30 reconstruction plans that have been submitted by the town to MassDOT for 25% design review. They state that the proposed bi-directional shared use path, that's a component of the project, raises numerous public safety issues. They state that the 2 proposed traffic signals in the project need further analysis, and that a much fuller public and engaging public participation process with affected residents needs to occur before widespread community support for the Route 30 project can be realized. They note their support for a viable and safe alternative for bicycle facilities along this route and ask the Boston MPO to be aware of these concerns when considering this project for future funding. Moving now to projects that are currently programmed in the draft TIP. Beginning with the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail in Sudbury and Concord, we received 15 individual letters of support for the project, including from U.S. Representative Catherine Clark, State Representative Carmine Gentile, Sudbury Town Manager Henry Hayes, and Sudbury Select Board member Charlie Russo. We also received a petition from the Friends of the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail, who organized an effort to gather some 513 signatures in support of the project from around the region. Collectively, the letter writers and the signers of the petition expressed significant support for the project, highlighting its status as an important connection in the larger regional trail network. The commenters tout the benefits of the project that will bring to the region, including creating safe off-road connections to critical destinations, providing recreation opportunities, promoting mode shift away from single occupancy vehicles, and supporting tourism and economic development. The commenters expressed their enthusiasm that the project remains funded in federal fiscal year 2022, and they look forward to this project moving towards construction over the next year or so. We received one comment letter from Kristen Kastner, the planning director in the town of Burlington, expressing the town's support for the continued inclusion of the intersection reconstruction at Route 3 and Bedford Road in Woburn and Burlington in the fiscal years 22 through 26 TIP. The letter notes that the project is anticipated to be ready for construction ahead of its current fiscal year 25 schedule, and that this project will improve safety and traffic movements at an intersection surrounded by critical community assets and businesses. The town of Burlington also highlighted their efforts to work with local property owners to identify and preserve over 9 acres of land through a conservation restriction, mitigating any potential Article 97 concerns that may arise as a part of the project. And then rounding out the letters on projects included in this year's TIP, we received comments from 35 residents of Newton expressing opposition to any delays or funding cuts to the accessibility improvements planned to the 3 Newton commuter rail stations. The letters highlight the importance of making these stations accessible for many in the Newton community and note that these improvements will support faster, more reliable community service to Newton, which remains a priority for the city. I should note that the fiscal year 22 CIP includes funding for the design of these station enhancements, and the future capital cost of this project is anticipated to be covered using federal loan funds through the Build America Bureau. We also received a number of comments on several broader topics and themes. As I noted earlier, we received feedback from our partners at MassDOT and the Federal Highway Administration on parts of the report where content should be clarified, added, or corrected. We also received feedback from Livable Streets Alliance supporting some adjustments to the project information in the report to allow for an easier understanding of year-to-year changes in project cost and status. Livable Streets also advocated for further updates to the online TIP project database. The 495 Metro West partnership commented on a number of topics. They expressed support for the 20 projects in the TIP that are currently funded in the 495 Metro West area, while also noting their dismay that 5 projects were delayed to later fiscal years. The partnership similarly expressed their disappointment that the Mass Central Rail Trail in Sudbury and Wayland was removed from the TIP. I should clarify here that this project has been funded using other non-federal sources, which is why it no longer appears in the draft. They also advocated for addressing the relative shortfall in funding in the Metro West region in fiscal years 22 through 26 through the allocation of the roughly $20 million in unprogrammed MPO funds to any number of potential Metro West projects currently under consideration by this board. In other comments, the City of Chelsea registered their support for allocating more of the MPO's funding to projects that support transit and promote bicycle and pedestrian safety and a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions through improvements to intersections. The City of Chelsea further advocated for the Mbta to move more quickly towards bus fleet electrification on the Silver Line, noting the air quality benefits that zero-emission vehicles would bring to historically burdened environmental justice communities in Chelsea and across the region. In addition to the comments I noted earlier, Livable Streets Alliance also weighed in support of the MPO's new TIP policy subcommittee. They noted how the cost increases seen in MPO-funded projects over the last 2 TIP cycles have radically limited the board's ability to advance its priorities in the region. They proposed an increase in accountability of all parties in the project development process and advocated for robust public engagement in the policy subcommittee. And finally, we received a comment from Newton resident Alex Griswold, who registered his support for a number of projects in the region that promote bicycle and pedestrian safety and access, including the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail in Sudbury and Concord, the rehabilitation of Mount Auburn Street in in Watertown, and the Charles River Greenway Bridge in Newton and Westin. Mr. Griswold also advocated for the accessibility improvements to Newton's commuter rail stations and stated his support for advancing progress on the larger Mass Central Rail Trail project. Before we dive in, I also want to say thank you to Conservation Law Foundation and Wiggs Amor for coming to comment during today's meeting, as well as thank you to all the folks who weighed in on the draft tip this year. We certainly appreciate all of your feedback, and we'll continue to take that into consideration both this year and in coming years. So thank you for taking the time to weigh in. So that wraps up a summary of the public comments that we received during the review period for the draft tip. And before we end, I do want to briefly highlight where we're going from here. Immediately following this meeting, the newly formed TIP Policy Subcommittee will host its first meeting. As a reminder, that committee was formed earlier this spring to discuss changes to current MPO policy that would better enable this board to navigate cost increases for TIP projects. The goals for this first meeting are to more concretely scope this committee's work and to develop a timeline and meeting schedule for the coming months. Like full board meetings, these subcommittee meetings are very much open to the public, so anyone who is interested in this topic is more than encouraged to attend. In the coming days, MPO staff will submit the final tip report to our partners at MassDOT. This becomes part of the larger state transportation improvement program, which is then sent to our federal partners for their approval. Though an endorsement vote will be taken today, the fiscal years 2022 through 26 tip won't go into effect until October 1st of 2021, with the start of federal fiscal year 2022. That means that until then, the amended 2021 through 25 tip is still the active federal capital plan for the region. As we move into the fall, we anticipate that the TIP Policy Subcommittee will bring a set of recommendations to the full board for consideration. Any policy changes will be communicated widely to stakeholders across the region and will be subject to a public review period before any decisions are made final in a vote by the full MPO board in the fall. And that is all I have, so I'll turn it back over to the chair for a discussion and vote.
Thank you, Matt. I see we have questions from the members. Jillian Linnell.
Hi, I just wanted to quickly clarify regarding the Newton commuter rail stations that Matt just referenced. Those are currently included in the Mbta CIP for design, and they were included in the TIP as a potential project funded by future RIF or TIFIA loans, but are not currently funded through construction in the CIP. So it was kind of like below the line in the TIP document. I just wanted to clarify that so there weren't any misunderstandings about what is actually included in the CIP at this time.
Thank you, Jillian. Next, David Kozis.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Jillian. I also wanted to say something about the response to all these Newton residents that made comments about the commuter rail stations. I think that there's something kind of maybe muddled, I guess, in the way that we have in the draft response that we have so far. There's just a lot of confusion, and I just see a lot more comments being made on our local blogs and a lot of email chatter. And I think that the response that we send out should say up front, that the MPO did not vote to remove funding on the TIP for reconstruction of any project in Newton, because that didn't happen. We didn't take any kind of vote like that. And it's confusing because, a lot of things have happened, right, with commuter rail, and the public just saw these new commuter rail schedules, right, that had big chunks of the day where the trains just go straight through Newton and they don't stop anywhere, in Newton. The only community on the Worcester line where the trains don't stop, and there's these long gaps. And that's because we have this continuing and long-standing problem that we have two tracks that go right through Newton, but all of our stations have platforms only on one side, right? So it makes operations difficult, and it's just easier to just skip the stops in Newton. But at the same time, we had this express bus service. We always had this express bus service that people could use to travel downtown, especially when they couldn't use the commuter rail. But then with the Forging Ahead process, one of the express buses was eliminated, and then all the other buses that serve these areas were changed so that they don't go downtown anymore. And we have this new rail bus that's not really workable. Well, I'll say it serves a different market than the commuters trying to travel into Boston. Or you could transfer, I guess, in Newton Corner from one bus to the other, but then you have to pay again because there's no free transfer between these buses. It's just a lot of confusion and a lot of frustration. And so, we can't respond to all of this in our little response to a tip comment, but at least I think we should make it as clear as we can that, and I think it's mostly there already, that the design is proceeding. As far as I know, there's funding for design, and the design is proceeding for all 3 stations, and that the MBTA and MassDOT are continuing to look for funding for construction. As far as I know, that is happening. But what I think is missing is just the basic fact, right? That the MPO never voted to remove funding for any of the Newton stations from the tip. And I think that, again, that should just be stated up front, and whatever clarity, we could provide, I think would help a lot in this case.
Thank you, David. Next up, Eric Barassa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question for staff. During public comment, there was an issue raised about sort of the disproportionate distribution of kind of the air quality benefit of across the region. And what I wanted to understand was, I know that when for the Green Line extension analysis, there was a similar sort of decrease or improvement in air quality, but not shared, obviously not shared across the region. And I wanted to know, is the analysis for our tip largely the result of the Green Line extension, or are there other projects that are resulting in an improvement in air quality, but are not happening in environmental justice communities at the same rate? If that makes sense.
Yeah, so I can probably tackle part of this, and we'll see. I don't know if Betsy Harvey's available to jump in on some of the more technical details of the analysis.
You're done, man.
Sorry. So I will comment that. So Conservation Law Foundation weighed in with a similar commentary on last year's tip. And so part of the reason we were limited on making progress on the distribution of funds to projects that reduce greenhouse gas emissions for environmental justice populations is because we didn't program any new projects in the 22 to 26 window. And so we were sort of left with the status quo of where we ended last year, which was this existing disparity. And obviously this year we did add funding in fiscal year 2021 for the center running bus lanes on Columbus Avenue in Boston. And so that project would, I imagine, show a greenhouse gas benefit for an environmental justice community, but that project would not have been included in the analysis for the 22 to 26 window because it was funded in 2021. And then I don't know if Betsy's here to talk about, to add to the specifics on the Green Line and how that weighed in, but if not, we'll be happy to follow up with more details on the relationship between those two analyses, because I know we did just recently do that analysis.
Betsy?
Yeah, I can speak to that. Thanks, Matt. So the way that we did, Matt is correct that the Columbus Avenue bus lanes are not included because they're from 2021, or they're in the 2021 tip. The way that the analysis is conducted for the tip is that all the projects are analyzed using, each project is individually analyzed using CMAQ data, CMAQ analysis data, and then aggregated up to kind of the regional level. So we're looking at the distribution of air quality impacts across the entire system, right? So we're not reporting individual projects in the public document. So certainly the Green Line extension would have, reduced improved air quality, and most of the projects did overall. But like Matt said, there was limited kind of change in the projects that we funded over the 2021 tip, simply because of extenuating circumstances around cost increases and the like. So I think that answers your question. Let me know if there's anything else about that analysis that I can answer.
Eric, you have any other questions on that? Seeing none, stay around, Betsy, because there might be more questions. Brian King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to endorse what David Kozes had said on behalf of Newton in the advisory board's review of the CIP. This also came up of the MBTA CIP, I should say. And David brought these issues up. And I do know, and I can concur that the CIP for the T has planning studies money in it for the Newton stations. But I do think David is correct that we should somehow note that the MPO itself is not ignoring the Newton commuter rail issue. It's just being handled through a different vehicle, no pun intended. And I just wanted to, thank David publicly for all of his advocacy on behalf of his city and just reiterate what he said. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Lynn Diggins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of short questions. So Matt, am I to understand that over the period of the TIP development, we had about 1,000 comments?
Yeah, that's correct. Roughly 1,100.
1,100. Okay. Great. So trying to control for projects like the Belmont bike path and Bruce Freeman, is your sense that public comments were up this year compared to last year?
Yeah, I think just thinking back to last year, so this year, definitely the comments on the Belmont Community Path and the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail skewed the number up. I mean, I think that those combined were in the neighborhood of 900 or so comments for those two projects.
That's even more than I thought. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So that leaves roughly like 200. So then how would that 200 compare? I'm sorry to step on you, Matt. I mean, how would that compare to last year if you take out Bruce Freeman, or at least consolidate?
Yeah, so I think this year we had a smaller number of projects overall that were commented on, even controlling for those two sort of high comment projects. And so I think because we had a number of comments as noted on the Newton commuter rail stations, and then also on the Swampscott rail trail. And so I think once you sort of control for those four, which all received sort of 30 or more comments, I think that the number of comments beyond that were slightly narrower, at least during the formal public comment period. That's
right.
Sort of
Thank you. Yeah, thanks. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Lynn. Betsy, can I ask you a question about environmental justice and the analysis?
Sure.
So does the analysis show that air quality is improving across the region in both environmental justice communities and non-environmental justice communities, and it is just not improving as quickly or as just as quickly for non-environmental justice communities, or is air quality actually getting worse in environmental justice community populations and improving in non-environmental justice community populations?
Let me bring it up real quick. Can I bring it up real quick and then answer your question so I don't speak incorrectly? We can go to someone else. Thank you.
In the meantime, David, do we want to perhaps call on Steve Olenoff?
No, I'd like to wait and get my question answered.
All right, my apologies. Thank you.
And plus, I want to as always, let members talk before we take public.
Absolutely.
You guys can raise. We'll get to Steve. You know what? I will call on Steve because I don't want Betsy to feel stressed because I'm waiting around. Steve?
Yes, I was also concerned about the letters from the Newton residents. Some of them seem to be mistakenly under the opinion that this involves total elimination of service to the 3 Newton stations. And I think the letter should correct that misconception. Your explanations, Matt, were very good. In fact, maybe the comments, the summary of the comments should be included in the letter so people can really understand what's going on. What you say is really good, but it's I think we really need to correct those misimpressions that people think this has to do with, totally defunding any service to Newton.
Thank you, Steve. Betsy?
Sorry about that. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to make sure I was getting the right data in front of me. So it depends on the population we're talking about, right? So we looked at emissions for carbon monoxide, volatile organic compounds, and nitrogen oxide emissions per 1,000 people. And so we broke it down by different equity population group, low income, people of color, people with limited English proficiency, 75 and older, 18 and younger, or 17 and younger, and people with disabilities. And for most of those population groups, you're correct that the decrease in emissions was greater for the equity population versus their kind of counterparts. So for communities of color, communities of low income, that was the case. People with limited English proficiency, also that was the case. The reverse is true for seniors and people with disabilities. Or sorry, just for seniors, people with disabilities, there was a greater decrease. So it just depends on what you're talking about. But overall, for most of our equity populations, they had a bigger decrease in emissions, exposure to these emissions, but that certainly, that doesn't necessarily get us to actually making, rectifying any existing disparities.
Right. So let me restate it, and then if I'm wrong, just please correct me. We made progress, but not enough. The progress we're making is not catching up the environmental justice communities. Am I framing that right? I'm just making sure I understand what's going on.
Yes, that is the issue, is that the systematic inequities are pervasive enough so that we're not making this year, not year after year, haven't made enough of an impact to kind of rectify those systematic inequities.
Thank you, Betsy. Eric, you have a question?
So just to be clear, Betsy, there was a decrease in emissions in environmental justice communities, but not as deep a decrease as in non-environmental justice communities?
Sorry, there was a bigger decrease. There was a bigger decrease for environmental justice communities, but given the systemic disparities, part of the challenge for us is that we don't have a great handle on kind of existing baseline disparities for our MPO region, and we're doing that study next year to kind of get a better handle on this so that we can kind of show you better data or kind of a better baseline of this is where we're starting from. We know that from other studies, we don't necessarily want to reinvent the wheel because we know that across the region and often across the United States that those inequities exist with pertaining to air quality. But we want to kind of be able to I think Johannes's point is be able to kind of measure our performance against a baseline and understand how much we're improving and kind of so that we can make sure that we're rectifying and eliminating those disparities as we go forward.
Thank you, Betsy. Johannes?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Betsy, for clarifying. Just to put a fine point on it, I'm looking at table 6.5 here in the tip. I see emissions reductions per 1,000 people in kilograms. For minority populations, I see minus 47.6. So that's 47.6 kilograms per 1,000 people. For non-minority populations, I see minus 51.6. So a greater reduction for non-minority, if I'm interpreting this table correctly. So you're right, Mr. Chair, that there is a reduction for minority populations. Air quality is getting better everywhere. The issue that we're concerned about is that it's getting better faster where it needs to least. Those with the best air are getting the greatest reductions now. And what that results in is a widening of the gap. So not just accounting for historical systemic disinvestment or overburdening of these populations, we are continuing to deepen that divide. Rather than not closing it fast enough, we're actually actively widening that gap. Is my understanding. I'd be happy to be corrected there. That's the concern that we've raised. Thank you.
Yeah, so we are making improvements over last year. I think that's, in terms of the trends, like that's, we have a greater percentage decrease in emissions for equity population groups over last year. And he is right to say that there is a slight per 1,000 people increase. So it's depends on how you look at it, but certainly there is still a gap.
Thanks, Betsy. Leonard?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the 47 versus 51, given the way that we measure it, Betsy, would you say that is statistically significant?
That's a really good question. I don't know. I think we'd have to have better understanding. We drew this data from CMAX analysis spreadsheets that we do with air quality spreadsheets for each project. So I'd have to have better understanding of the data that go into the CMAC analyses.
Okay, great, thanks.
Other questions on this or any other issue on the tip? Seeing none, can I get a motion in a second to approve the tip as presented today, or any other motion anyone would like to make? Eric Barassa.
I will make a motion to approve the federal fiscal year 22 to 26 tip as presented today.
Brian Kane.
I'm always delighted to second Eric Barassa's motions.
Motion having been made and seconded, please call the roll.
MassDOT Chair,
Yes.
MassDOT Seat 2,
John Bouchard, yes.
MassDOT Highway Division,
Don Romano, yes.
MBTA,
Jillian Linnell, yes.
MAPC,
Eric Barassa, yes.
MBTA Advisory Board,
Brian Kane, yes.
Regional Transportation Advisory Council,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
City of Boston BTD,
Bill Conroy, yes.
City of Boston BPDA,
Chief Fitzgerald, yes.
At-large City of Everett,
Jay Monty, yes.
At-large City of Newton,
David Kozis, yes.
At-large Town of Arlington,
Maybe we circle back to this one.
At-large
Oh, I'm
Town
sorry.
of,
Daniel M. So that's Arlington, yes.
thank you. At-large Town of Brookline,
Heather Hamilton, yes.
Inner Core City of Somerville,
John Bent, yes.
Metro West City of Framingham,
Pat Chiquiza votes yes.
North Shore City of Beverly,
Darlene Wynn votes yes.
North Suburban City of Woburn,
Jeannie Cassidy votes yes.
Swap, Town of Medway.
Peter Pelletier votes yes.
And Trick, Norwood, and RRC.
I'm O'Rourke, yes.
Thank you. That motion carries.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is, I believe, a discussion of the Route 53 project. In one way.
Okay, just unmute. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. My name is Zhenyang Wang, MPO staff of the Traffic Analysis and Design Group. Next. This study is a part of 2020 Unified Planning Work Program, and is also a continued effort by the MPO to address sub-regional transportation needs. Since 2013, we have conducted this study at various locations throughout the region. In this past year, we reviewed over 20 intersection, over 20 corridors, and select Route 53 in Norwell for study. Next. During the course of study, staff worked closely with the town, MAPC, and Mbta. We had 3 study advisory meetings to identify issues and concerns, and to review findings and the proposed improvement. Next. Route 53 is a major highway in the South Shore subregion. It runs parallel to Route 3 and is usually used as an alternative route when Route 3 is congested. The select corridor is about 2.2 miles from Route 228, that is Pond Street and the Main Street, all the way to Annisippi Avenue near the Hanover border. It has 4 synchronized intersection, and one of them is a mid-block synchronized crosswalk. It is basically a 2-lane roadway, 1 lane in each direction, and classified as a urban minor arterial under District 5 jurisdiction. And based on the existing land uses, the corridor can be divided into 3 sections. The north commercial section is most densely developed and has a large number of commercial development, including KM Plaza that house TJ Maxx, Home Goods, and Big White supermarket. And the section south of Whole Drive is another major commercial district, including large scale Star and Shop. And middle section is less developed in wooded area, but it also has some businesses and the Norwell Public Safety Headquarters. Next. The numbers shown on this slide are the represented the normal traffic condition, estimated normal traffic condition in 2020, not the COVID condition. The count was collected by Mbta in October 2020, and the count was increased by 8% to represent the normal traffic conditions. Based on our review of Mbta COVID traffic monitoring report and the analysis of the historic data. And as you can see, next, in the north side is more have more traffic and have about 25,000 vehicles per day, and it has the 2 intersections are very congested, usually during especially in the PM peak hour. Next. And we also identified the 2 commercial section is especially congested because people try to access to the adjacent business and blocking the through traffic. Next. The speed limits in the corridor basically is in 3 zones. The section near the Queen Plaza is under 35 miles per hour speed limit. The middle section is 40 miles per hour. It's from Queen Plaza to the middle section that is shown in orange color. Rest of the corridor is again under 35 miles per hour speed limits. And the 85 percentile usually regarded as a prevailing speed. So as we can see in the corridor, the prevailing speed is generally between 40 and 45 miles per hour. Next. In recent 5 years, there were nearly 300 recorded crashes in this corridor, and this is resulted crash rate is higher than the urban minor arterial, the average urban minor arterial in the state, and most of the crashes are rear-ended and angle collisions. Half of them occur during the peak traffic period. We also constructed a series of collision diagrams in the entire corridor and identified the 2 intersections and the 2 commercial districts are high crash locations. And there were 2 pedestrian crashes, one at the Palm Street intersection, one at the Mississippi Avenue, and 1 bicycle crashes on Route 53 near the Queen Anne Plaza. Next. Next, we will use a short film to show the existing condition of the corridor. The video basically is taken in January and November of last year. Next. So we started from the Palm Street intersection, and we heading south toward the Hanover border. And this is the north commercial section. As you can see, there's a 2-way left turn lane in the middle, and it runs continuously about 1,500 feet, and it's wide. And also the through travel lane is also quite wide. This allows people to travel fast in this area. And now we are heading toward to the High Street intersection. And there's a CVS on the right. And past High Street, the roadway back to the two-lane roadway, one lane in each direction. But they also have a small and middle scale business on both sides. This is the middle section in the wooded area, and we are approaching the public safety headquarters on the right. And past the whole drive, this is another section of the commercial district, and that we just passed the synchronized crosswalk. And the Noel Athletic Club is very popular location, car wash, different size of business on both sides. And we are heading toward the Star and Shop intersection. And the Mississippi Avenue intersection is very wide. And now we are heading northbound and also review some of the issue in the corridor. This is the Star and Shop intersection again. And usually in the PM, because there are a lot of traffic, also people try to get to the adjacent business, it's very congested. And this is the people in action crossing the mid-block cross location. And as the corridor doesn't have accommodation for cyclists, this is an observation of young people riding on the sidewalk. And of course, there's many driveway along the entire corridor. And there's no sidewalk on the south side, most of section of the corridor. And the congestion location and the unsafe 2-way operation in the north commercial section. and the Punk Street intersection is most congested in the entire corridor. Next. These are the issues we just show in our analysis and in the videos. Next. And to address those issues, we developed a set of the corridor improvement objectives. Next. And to achieve that objectives, we also set up a series of corridor design strategies, and this we will see in our proposed improvement. Next. In the next few slides, we will show the proposed improvement in different sections of the corridor from the north to the south. First is the section between Punk Street and the High Street, where you have this twiddle lane, two-way left-turn lane, run continuously for about 1,500 feet. This allows the people to drive fast on the twiddle lane. A rule of thumb is that one should not travel on twiddle for more than 200 feet because it's basically for the turning, not for the traveling. We propose to restripe the twiddle lane and break it up into 3 sections. First is to remove the twiddle lane marking at the Queenland Plaza intersection, and we also add a stripe traffic median just south of the Damon Farm Way. So this will prevent people to travel continuously. We also propose to reduce the through travel lane and reduce the twiddle lane width and increase the shoulder width for temporary bicycle accommodation. And after this restriping, the whole section can be considered to change the speed limit from 40 to 35 miles per hour. Next. In the long term, the whole section should be reconstructed. And in addition to the twiddle lane modification, we also propose to modify the Punk Street intersection to extend the left-turn length for the northbound and southbound, relocated crosswalk and shorten the crossing distance and retime the signal. And at the Queenland Plaza intersection, we propose to signalize it at the crosswalk and the pedestrian signal and coordinate the signal with the signal at the Punk Street intersection. Meanwhile, most importantly, we propose to add the bike lane on the northbound, on the north side, and convert it to the existing sidewalk to the multi-use path on the south side, and to provide the pedestrian and bicycle accommodation and improve their safety. Next. At the High Street intersection, again, we propose to extend the northbound left turn at the on the High Street and add the crosswalk on the Route 53 southbound location and return the signal. Next. South of the High Street, there's a series of small and medium-sized business. We propose to add the center lane to provide a two-way left-turn lane and the left-turn lane in this section, and also reconstruct the sidewalk and provide the accommodation for people who walk and bike. And at the Oak Street intersection, we propose to reduce the intersection layout and add crosswalk at that intersection. Next. In the middle section, in addition to add left turn only lane and traffic median, and add the multi-use pass for pedestrian and cyclists, we also propose to install emergency traffic control system for the public safety headquarters. This system would include a double emergency hybrid beacons facing each direction of Route 53 and a wide intersection space of about 150 feet for the emergency vehicle operation, and a series of advanced warning signs in each direction of Route 53. Next. And in the south side, commercial district, we propose the left-hand lane in the middle and the accommodation for the multi-use pass for the pedestrian and bicycle in this wooded environment. So this improvement will support the village style mixed use commercial development in this section. Next. In the last section, in addition to safety and accommodation improvement, we also propose to improve operations at the two major intersections. At the Start and Shop intersection, we propose to change the northbound left turn from the lagging phase to the leading phase, in addition to improve the operation and the safety there, especially during the PM peak period. And at the Mississippi Avenue intersection, we propose to significantly reduce the intersection layout and so that to reduce the crossing distance, increase safety for the pedestrians. Next. All the proposed improvements were input to the synchro traffic model for capacity analysis under the projected 2030 traffic conditions. In general, all the intersections will be operated at the acceptable level of services. Next. The proposed improvement have a number of benefits. Together, they will increase the efficiency of the traffic operation and the pedestrian bicycle operation on Route 53, support economic conditions, and enhance livability for the adjacent neighborhood and the sub-region. Next. This study provides a vision for the corridor's long-term improvement. The short-term improvement are highly beneficial. They should be implemented when funding resources are available. For this corridor, it would be effective implemented under 3 projects. The first is to return the 3 major signals. The second is to restripe the north commercial section. And the last is to install emergency traffic control system at the public safety headquarters. And the recommended long-term improvement would require much more sufficient resources. So we propose 4 implementation phases for considerations. Among this proposal, the town consider the 3 short-term improvements are very beneficial and is currently seeking resources for prioritizing the implementations. Thank you, and I welcome the comments.
Thank you, Timon. Questions or comments from the members? Leonard Diggins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Every time I read one of these, I'm just more and more impressed by them. I mean, there's just so much good work that was done here. I have some questions, and please feel free to give me short answers. And if I want more follow-up, I'll ask for it. So you indicate that the survey indicated strong community engagement from the 217 responses. And this isn't a criticism. I'm just trying to understand, what is the basis by which you say that indicates strong community engagement? Because I have no basis, excuse me, no way of knowing whether 217 is good or not.
Yes, again, this is another good statistic question. And this is just, we say have good responses. It's just based on our, we have several corridor study, and just based on our experiences, and judging from the Norway have only about 4,000 households, and the town is very cooperative, and they put this on the all the social media, and also our MPO staff also put to the MAPC newsletter, and widely publicized. And
okay.
So the first week we got the almost half of more than hundreds of responses. I think that is relative well responded.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you. You had zip code data. Did that allow you to get any demographic data out of it? Could you tease out any kind of information about the nature of the people who responded, more so getting towards the equity types of questions?
Yeah. Unfortunately, this time, this past time, we didn't have that demographic data. But in the coming corridor study, we included that.
Gotcha. Okay.
Demographic data.
Okay. I'm going to ask one more question, then I'm going to stop and let someone else ask questions, and maybe I can come back maybe for a couple more. And so, just trying to understand something about the way the study was done. I like the aspect that you had an advisory committee. I noted that it met 3 times, meaning that there was a year between the first and the second meetings of the advisory committee. What happened in that intervening period? I mean, were they just waiting for you to come back, with the results of your study, and then they look at the results?
Well, basically, when we conducted this corridor study, the first meeting, we worked with the community and the Mbta and the stakeholder to scope the study, and then the second one, we come back after they told us what's the major issue and concern. We come back, conducted the analysis, and then we go back. The second meeting, we show them our analysis of the existing condition, and the last one, and also in the second meeting, we usually discuss potential improvement idea, and in last meeting, we show them our proposed improvement. But in between, anytime we work closely with the town and Mbta, any comment or feedback, we work close with them, especially after the third meeting. We also continue communication, and we revise our proposed improvement, and then we have the committee again review the final report, and then finalize the study.
Great. I'm happy to hear about the continuing engagement. So like I said, I'll stop now, and if I'm time, maybe I'll come back, and my next question might be more directed towards Eric Rivers. So thank you.
Daniel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had a quick question. Just seeing the cross sections that are proposed or that are suggested for, I guess, the long term. Is the was I correct? It looked like the bike lane on the one side that wasn't on the shared use path side. The bike lane that's sort of separated from the sidewalk. Is that? It looks like it was shown as a raised over, like more like on the sidewalk level or sort of in between. Is that correct?
Yes, yes, you are correct. This is basically, you know, with my review the whole corridors right away and the existing utility location, and some location is basically because the utility location and the so we have to separate, use the space to separate the bike lane and the sidewalk, because the town prefer share use pass, but with the utility right in the middle, it's hard to put on the share use pass. So with those conditions, and we propose that them separate. Of course, at the real design stage, we also have to consider the Mbta's a separated bike lane standard, and but that would be at the design stage. I think at this planning stage, we lay out this. We are considering also not only the existing right of way, also the existing utility locations.
Yeah, thank you. I just thought that was a great, I mean, I thought it was a great recommendation to see that on there, to see that thinking on that level, considering the speed limit here and the challenge for being comfortable for having a comfortable bike facility on a facility such as this with lots of traffic and high speed. So, I think some of you have some challenges with the number of driveways that are on here, but that's, I don't want to get into the weeds about design. I just thought that was a great, thank you for recommending that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Mark Abbott, do you have something you want to clarify or say?
Yeah, I just wanted to also add to Len's question there that the reason it was such a long time between the first and second committee readings is that we were delayed in getting some of our data collection efforts taken care of because of COVID. So that's really what caused a lot of delay. But Yen did a nice job, during that time communicating with the town of what was happening and what was going on with the schedule all during that time.
Thanks, Mark. Lynn?
Yes, thanks, Mark. I mean, and what I really like about this, is the way the town is really is engaged in it, and I think this can feed into our next meeting because there's some things we can do in the short term and some things we can do in the long term. And with a town that seems so cooperative, I think I'm excited about this one. And so my quick question maybe for Eric is, do you think if this corridor was improved, it might be to be potential for some mixed use development? I'm asking it from the MAPC angle because I understand that you were one of the groups that were involved as a stakeholder.
Eric, you want to answer that? Oh, wait for Eric. Mark, Eric, you want to answer that?
Yeah, I think they did outreach through the South Shore, through the sub-region. I was not directly involved in this body of work. I don't, I actually don't know about what the sort of like level of mixed use growth and planning is along this corridor.
Okay.
But
I don't know is a good answer.
We are, we are doing a body of work for the South Shore Coalition looking at improved sort of last mile connections to like important destinations. And as part of that, we are doing an inventory of growth areas through our mass builds site where we document kind of all development in the region. And so we will have, I think, after that body of work, a better sense of kind of where, where do the various communities see more of their growth occurring in the subregion. So we can, layer that on top of this.
Great, thanks. And I can't wait to say Tweedle when I report back to the advisory council.
Excellent. Mark, you want to say anything more before we wrap this up?
Yeah, just to add to your question there, Len. Actually, MAPC first introduced us to Norwell when they were doing some actual rezoning work for Norwell as well. So, and one of the things they were looking at is also doing some mixed-use development where the Queen Anne's Corner is in that shopping plaza. So Norwell is thinking about some redevelopment potential on this corridor as well for mixed use.
Great, thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you, Lynn. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Juman. Very good job, as always. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is the CTPS 5-year strategic plan. Tegan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me make sure I have control over the screen. Looks like that's coming. There we go. Okay, thanks for your patience. And everyone, thank you for entertaining me last on the agenda. I plan to speak for about 10 to 15 minutes, and I do hope to engage you in a little bit of conversation because I'm here today to talk about the draft CTPS 5-year strategic plan, which we will soon be finalizing. I began to talk to you, the board, about this, about developing a plan in early 2020. And then I last presented to you in my early January 2021 Executive Director's Report when I described the developing mission, vision, values, and focus areas coming out of this process. And since now we're approaching the end of this process, my presentation today will involve a little bit of recap, but also more about the goals themselves and objectives that are associated with them in our plan. They are documented in more detail in the draft document that we posted online in the meeting materials. And what you'll see in that document is kind of additional prioritized set of actions to accomplish the objectives and goals that I'm going to talk about today. So I'll stop at that level of detail. And if you have more questions, I'm always happy to talk about additional detail. And I'd like to emphasize that this is a CTPS, Central Transportation Planning Staff strategic plan. It's for us as an organization and not directly for the MPO. But of course, the lines are a little bit blurry due to the fact that we are staff to the MPO. This process, the strategic planning process, was intended to be completed before you as a board decide how you want to move forward with developing an operations plan, as recommended in the 2019 Federal Certification Review Report by Federal Highway Administration and Federal Transit Administration. So when I talk, I'll try to keep the distinguishing lines as clear as possible, but it can be challenging to navigate, so please don't hesitate to ask questions about that as well. So on that note, when we engaged in our process, I also want to call out right at the beginning that we heard some themes and potential objectives from our outreach that really isn't for us as CTPS to decide upon or implement, but they could be relevant for your consideration when developing the operations plan. So those are footnoted at the objective level in both the draft document, and I will also try to highlight them here, and they are not taken any further in our plan, the CTPS plan that we're talking about today. So after today, we'll be finalizing the document, and we'll add a few pieces not shown yet, which I'll talk about later. But I just want to say that I view today as a place for any substantive input from you, the board, before we finalize this 5-year plan for CTPS as an organization. All right, let's get started. So the strategic planning process, the CTPS strategic planning process, was carried out by engaging an external consultant. We managed this by identifying unused funds due to a unique case of contract overlap between the planning and 5303 funds, the PL and 5303 funds, before they were put on the same schedule. So I'll leave it at that, although there are more details, but we were able to reallocate those funds and extend our ability to use them. And that's what allowed us to hire an outside consultant for this effort, which I think was incredibly valuable for us. We issued an RFP in February of 2020, and we engaged a team of 2 consulting groups, Naven Associates and Claremont Consulting, and they facilitated a research project process, extensive engagement, and then the development of the plan itself. And as you can see here from the dates, the plan took about a year, whereas our original timeframe was expected to be about 4 to 6 months. That timeline was developed in our pre-pandemic and early pandemic environment. So it did take a bit longer in the virtual environment, but it was still completed within the original budget. A little trouble advancing, sorry about that. Okay, so the bulk of the engagement that we did through this plan was with a steering committee that had about 20 members, and those represented both a wide cross-section of CTPS personnel from junior to senior, as well as stakeholders from the board. So I think I've done this before, but I'd like to highlight that we had excellent board participation with Ben Muller, representing the Mass DOT Office of Transportation Planning, which is David Muller's group, Eric Barassa from MAPC, Brian Kane from the Mbta Advisory Board, and Len Diggins from the Regional Transportation Advisory Council, and Ken Miller, our ex officio FHWA representative. So that group actually put in quite a commitment, and they met 7 times in relatively long meetings and participated in a retreat over 2 half days, roughly within the year. Their last meeting was actually in April of 2021. And they were all online due to the pandemic. And then another important point to highlight here is that there was really heavy involvement by me and the rest of the management team, executive leadership and directors in this process to help the consultants finalize the draft plan that you now see online. And again, I view that as critical because an effective strategic plan does require high-level leadership buy-in and sort of shepherding through the process. So our process had 2 main components. First, we carried out an organizational assessment. In this part, the steering committee primarily analyzed strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats for CTPS, also called a SWOT analysis. And then also the consultants developed 16 research questions / interview questions in collaboration with the steering committee input, and then conducted 25 individual interviews, as well as 11 focus groups that engaged a combined 98 participants. So well over 100 participated in that process, and then a survey was also released to all CTPS staff to solicit additional feedback from the entire staff. And then finally, in this initial part of the process, 10 comparable MPOs were researched to look at what kinds of high-level trends and choices are being made by other MPOs. There is a wide variety out there, so it's very hard to identify kind of clear and concise and consistent trends. The second part was the development of the plan itself. And this included really working with the steering committee. This part of the work really launched in that 2-day retreat. And that was where we revised our mission, vision, goals, and objectives, and all of that was informed by step 1. This was also the point at which we evaluated which themes and objectives we had heard in that step 1 process that were outside of the purview of the CTPS strategic plan, and instead would be sort of indicated for the board's consideration as part of the operations plan development. So again, they're footnoted and should be clearly highlighted in the document. And then I do want to emphasize as well that after the committee did the bulk of the work, the leadership team really took everything through up to the objectives kind of and worked very closely with the consultants to really then flesh out the very specific actions, the lead staff, and the prioritization for how those objectives would be implemented. And those were again reviewed by the steering committee before this draft came to you. So what we ended up with was a 5-year strategic plan for CTPS, and that's for state fiscal years 22, which starts July 1 and through 26. So what you see here on the slide are the elements that are in the plan. We've already talked about the mission, vision, mission, values, and focus areas. So I won't repeat those here, but I'll just remind you that they were grounded in themes and values around leadership, collaboration, diversity and equity, climate resiliency, transparency, and integrity, among others. So hopefully those all sound like very harmonious themes and goals. And then in the following slides, I'm just going to very, very briefly highlight the goals in an abbreviated way that are associated with those focus areas, because those you haven't quite seen yet, unless you've read the plan that we posted, and then verbally talk a little bit about the objectives associated with that. The one thing I'll highlight before I start is that, again, the actions are in the draft document, but then there's also a couple of items that we're still developing, and that's an expense table, which will try to call out some of the resources that may be required to complete the plan, as well as an implementation dashboard to help us assess how we're doing in terms of achieving this plan over the next 5 years. So let's start with the goals. Again, very briefly, I'll summarize these. This isn't the full language. And I do also want to emphasize that when you see language here like expand, increase, etc., that are like kind of action verbs, typically one of the first action associated with an objective here is actually to assess the need for this, or to sort of like confirm the direction we want to go in. We just didn't want to put the word consider in front of every single one of our goals in the language. But please understand that these are not necessarily foregone conclusions, and that there is usually an exploratory initial action or two to understand better how to accomplish this if we do in fact want to do so to the degree it's said in the goal. So the first goal is focused on being a leader in our field, and the objectives associated with that are really related to our model roadmap, which Marty Milkovits has talked to you about. It's our strategic plan to modernize and improve some of our most important planning tools that we offer for the region. And it also has objectives around how we can best share, our knowledge and experience, both in the region, but also more broadly, so that we can work to be a leader in the field nationally. Forgive my sniffling, the allergies are not so much fun. Goal 2 includes objectives that are focused on improving our project management practices, including how we monitor our performance in project delivery. And that includes also getting feedback from those that we work with. There's also objectives related to how we improve and increase our professional development in this area. Goal 3. There we go. It includes objectives around, first, to my point earlier, assessing the existing and anticipated technical assistance needs of our Boston region communities, and then working to see whether we can better meet those needs in terms of our skills, our capacity, and our resources. And then goal 4 is grayed out because this one is mostly deferred, as I mentioned, something that is all within the purview of the CTPS strategic plan. The part that does remain in our plan involves an objective around how we continue to improve our orientation and training of new board members, and even support existing board members to help you all better support, to better support you in your roles as board members. Some of the deferred items include things like clarifying decision matrices, things that really should be discussed in the operations plan context. Goal 5 is a goal really focused around how we maintain and increase the excellence of our workforce at CTPS. And the objectives in that goal are oriented around how we revise our organizational chart and even our physical space in ways that allow us to be more effective, to allow us to collaborate better across groups, and to empower our project managers and our staff in general to succeed in their roles. There are multiple objectives as well related to how we support and invest in our staff through professional development, career growth, and value recognition. And it also involves objectives towards improving our orientation and onboarding processes, as well as evolving and adjusting our evaluation process. So as you can guess, goals like this are actually, they can be a really heavy lift for us in terms of our internal resources, as well as the human resources support provided by MAPC, which is our fiduciary agent. So we really do need to be realistic as we strive to achieve these and all the goals, really. Goal 6 includes objectives related to putting more of our attention and resources towards our commitment to advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion, both internally and externally. We've put a lot of thought into this as an organization, particularly in terms of analysis, but we really do have a long ways to go, both internally and externally. And these objectives would involve establishing an internal committee and identifying multiple paths forward towards training and improvement as an organization in these areas. And only a few more. Goal 7. So this goal we've learned through feedback is easy to misinterpret relative to our intent, the way the language is framed here. So I just want to highlight that where you see marketing strategies here, this really isn't intended in a sales sense, but more again about identifying needs in the communities and working to figure out how we can better support and meet those needs. But the key component of this goal is really being able to effectively communicate who we are as an agency and what it is that we do. So that's really the intent and the focus of this goal and the objectives that are associated with it. And then goal 8 is entirely deferred. As you can see here in the language, it's really about the fiduciary agreement and relationship between the organizations. I just think it's worth including it here just to know the topic came up, but it really is a separate conversation. And then goal 9 involves, and this I felt like I really did need to put in the word consider, and I'll show you later how it's prioritized differently. This involves really looking at the feasibility, viability, and desirability of working with our partners to consider accessing additional funding sources. So again, it's not a foregone conclusion that we would want to diversify our funding sources, but we wanted there to be space in our plan to be able to consider and explore the opportunity to do that with close collaboration with our fiduciary agent, as well as other partners. So that's the highlights of the goals and objectives. This table on this slide, called Objectives, Activities, and Timeframe, is an overview of how we are prioritizing the goals and the accomplishment of the goals in the 5-year plan. As you can see, for example, if you look in the first line, sector leadership, and the second and third columns, within each goal, there are multiple objectives, and within the objectives, multiple activities. So there's more nuance in terms of each objective in here, but generally speaking, what you'll see in the last 2 columns, where it has the time frame, is that we typically intend to develop or create plans, processes, materials related to the objectives in the first 2 years of the plan, state fiscal years 22 and 23. And then the implementation is generally intended to be in the final 3 years of the plan, state fiscal year 24 through 26. As I mentioned earlier, the most notable exception here is down at the bottom of the table, number 9, funding and operations, which again involved assessing that feasibility and desirability of expanding funding sources. As indicated here, this goal has a lower priority with the assessment around this objective or the develop create phase beginning actually 2 fiscal years from now. So that would be further out past some of these other priorities we set here. So I'll just say a couple more points. As I said at the beginning, I do view this as an opportunity for us to hear your substantive feedback before we finalize our plan, our CTPS strategic plan. There's no action associated with this agenda item today, but I do want to make sure the board is aware of and aligned with our path forward as an organization. Since we're staffed to the MPO, there's clearly a need for harmony between our goals as an organization and the board's moving forward. And then one last comment that I want to make about resources is that it's clear that we can't accomplish all the things that are in this plan without identifying and investing some of our resources in it. As I've noted prior to this, there is a plan to create an expense table for certain activities that'll highlight what some of those resources might be, but there's also just a lot of internal kind of time and investment. We are an organization of limited resources, and so we know we will have to be creative, adaptive, and certainly realistic as we work to accomplish this plan. But we want to make sure the plan is aspirational enough to lead us forward as an organization. So we'll work with the Administration and Finance Committee, as well as the board when needed, to work to identify potential sources for additional resources where they might be feasible. And then with that, Mr. Chair, thank you. And I'd like to turn it over for questions and discussions.
Thanks, David. Any questions or discussion from the members? Please raise your hand. Brian King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to thank Tegan publicly for taking on this work. This is the sausage making part of the administration, and it's not pretty, it's not fun, it's not always enjoyable, but it's really necessary. And I just want to applaud you. I think this work is really going to ground the staff and the board in the goals and objectives that you're setting. And I'm purposefully saying that you're setting because this is really your baby. And I know it's a group effort, but I just wanted to give you my thanks for doing this. And I know that in the future, this is going to lead to a much stronger, more efficient, and really better organization. Thank you.
Daniel Amstutz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Tegan, for this. I completely agree and second the comments of Brian Kane just now. So I think this is great and really interesting and really great work that the organization is taking this up and moving ahead with it. A comment and then sort of follow-up question on the process or next steps. One comment was I'm glad, certainly very glad that the goal 6 about diversity and equity was put into there. I sort of wondering when that was going to come up. I actually thought of it immediately on the goal 5 regarding staffing and structure and so on. And so I wonder, or I would assume that sort of the diversity equity piece of it as applicable would sort of be integrated in sort of the rest of the goals. It's just sort of putting that out there, or wondering if that's sort of the intent of it as well. And then the follow-up question is, I haven't been able to look at the whole document, the whole draft strategic plan that's posted up here. Are you looking for any thoughts or comments on that in a certain time frame, or assuming that they're understanding that this isn't like to be approved by the MPO exactly, since it's more of an organizational, being CTPS being its own separate organization. I'm just wondering if you are looking for any further comments on that from members or the public, in the next week or something.
Yeah, I'll go in reverse order, Daniel. First, I would welcome any comments or conversation you want to have about this in the coming, say, few weeks. We are trying to finalize the other elements, and certainly the intent here was to listen to any questions, concerns about clarification, feedback from you all, and where feasible, sort of work that in to what we have in the plan. Kind of acknowledging that what's in the plan has evolved out of a pretty extensive process. So point being, I welcome your comments and questions. You should feel free to reach out to me in the coming week or two if you want to provide some of those. I would certainly appreciate it. And then going back to your earlier question about diversity, equity, and inclusion, it is certainly a goal that DEI is embedded into any and everything we do, from how we function in a meeting to how we perform our analysis to our recruitment processes to everything. That said, I'm sure you also understand this. In addition to having it should be incorporated into everything, but we all still have such a long ways to go. And so it still really needs its own dedicated space and effort and sort of place in a plan to sort of make sure that we're giving it the intention that we need to start to better integrate it into everything, these topics into everything that we're doing. So that's yes, but also yes, it needs a separate commitment, a separate and standalone commitment.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Lynn?
Well, I guess, I'm not gonna let my feelings get hurt by what Mr. Kane said, because I certainly enjoyed working on this. I thought it was fun. It was hard work, and I have to give, I have to praise the consultants, because they hadn't done anything like this. This was new for them, and I think we're all trying to wrap ourselves around it early on, but it was a really good group of people to work with. Everyone was very respectful, I think we all learned a lot, and so it's good sausage. It's really good sausage. So dive in. Thanks.
Thanks, Lynn.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Lynn.
Brian.
Any other questions, comments, issues of discussion? Seeing none. Thank you, Tegan.
Thank you.
So next item on the agenda is member items. Are there any? So when's our next meeting? 2 weeks from now, is that right?
We are currently scheduled for June 17th. We may want to just discuss that. So we have our agenda setting meeting early next week, but we are currently scheduled for June 17th. And the A&F committee is also scheduled for June 17th, and that should really stick no matter what. So plan on the A&F committee meeting for sure, please.
So put a meeting on your calendar, but there's a chance it will be taken down, so watch for an email. I also should note that we are, I believe, the 17th is after the end of the executive order establishing the emergency rules around virtual meetings. The governor has filed something to extend it. It has not yet been extended. So at some point, we will have to figure out how to go towards possibly a hybrid meeting structure. So stay tuned. If that happens and we're required to do a hybrid, I believe the rules are that you have to have a quorum in the room. And we will then at that point need to figure out which of the members are willing to commit to make up the quorum. But there's time to think about that because I'm hopeful that we actually won't have to meet this month in the next 2 weeks. Any other questions, comments from anyone? Seeing none, can I get a motion and a second to adjourn? And please state your name for the record. Eric Barassa.
Eric Barassa, I make a motion to adjourn.
Lynn Diggins.
Second.
Motion having been made and seconded without objection, we are adjourned. Thank you all very much. Bye, guys.